All right, I believe we are live. Thank you for joining us today. Today I have with me the Thunderous one. He's going to be talking about Islam's prophet dilemma, or Conundrum, as he likes to call it. Let me open us with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with believers and unbelievers around the world. We ask that anyone watching now or later on the replay approach the material with an open mind, whether they are Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, that they not simply just dismiss what we have to say, but really take it into account, think about it, and see if reality matches their beliefs. We ask that you be with us today, that you guide our discussion and give us the words to say. We ask that anything that we say that is false is simply forgotten, and whatever we say that is true and useful is remembered and applied to people's lives. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So like I said, we're going to be talking about Islam's prophet conundrum. I have with me Thunderous One. About a month ago, maybe 2 months ago at most, he was on the channel to give his testimony. Everyone really enjoyed that, so we're very excited to have him back. Welcome.
Hi, Thaddeus. Thank you for having me back on the show again. It's a privilege to be invited back, and I'd like to say a big shout out to the audience, and in particular with those who I've communicated with since then in the comments. I've particularly enjoyed communicating with those who left comments and left some encouraging words and some humorous words as well. So I thank you for that, and thank you for listening to the show now, and hopefully what I've prepared could be of something of benefit, not just for your own better understanding of Islam, but also for discussing with other Muslims that it's incumbent on them that when their God or their prophet makes statements, then there really has to be some kind of response to the statements that are made. So shall I get deep into it then, Thaddeus?
Yeah, just one quick word. I'm trying out StreamYard for the first time today, so hopefully that goes smoothly. If you see any kinks, just have patience with me. I've never used the software before. You may proceed with your planned material now.
Okay, then. So we're talking about Islam and the statement that Muhammad made in the hadith about 124,000 prophets. In this instance, it's kind of logical to deduce that the first prophet will have been Muhammad, and the last prophet will have, the first prophet will have been Adam, and the last prophet will have been Muhammad. So this number comes from a hadith in Musnad Imam Ahmad, narrated by Abu Umama al-Bahili, relating the conversation that Abu Dar had with the Prophet. To translate, I said, "Oh, Messenger of Allah, how many prophets were there?" He replied, 124,000, from which 315 were Jama Gafira. So that's the hadith. There are other hadiths that correspond with this, but we'll just use the one in this instance. So Muhammad is making it clear that 124,000 prophets have been sent by Allah. Logic dictates that first one be Adam, the last one be Muhammad. So moving forward then, about 25 prophets are mentioned in the Quran. So there is a deficit of 123,975 not accounted for. So who are they? Where did they live? What did they write? Did they live concurrently? Did they live consecutively? Why are they not mentioned? Where are the books that they revealed? What were the books they revealed? What did these books say, teach, reveal? What languages were they revealed in? What languages did these prophets speak? What lands did they go to? This is an interesting point because the further back in time we go, the population of humans reduces. For example, today on Earth, we have a human population of 7.8 billion. Back in 1968, when I was born, it was 3.6 billion. And back in 1900, the human population on Earth was only 1.6 billion. And finally, in the year 200, the estimated figure stands at 190 million. So logic dictates the further back in time we go, as the human population reduces, the need for a certain number of prophets, messengers per generation reduces too. We will discuss the certain number of prophets, messengers per generation later in the discussion. Now, Muslims will say that these prophet messengers went to different nations, but this is a problem too. Today, we have on Earth 195 countries, but further back in time we go, we find less countries listed. For example, in 1900, only 77 countries were listed. So logic dictates again, the further back in time we go, as the number of humans were fewer, thus the number of nations would be reduced. As an example, Pakistan and Bangladesh were once India. Now they are 3 separate countries, all coming from post-1947. On a side point, the media and the education system, and possibly the vagueness of some statements via politics, commerce, science, and the education system give the impression the world's overpopulated. This is a blatant lie and a discussion in itself. However, I make mention of this as language creates pictures in people's minds, thus resulting in mental images of metropolises abounding everywhere in the past, when in reality, the further back in time we go, humans were in fact very sparse, scattered, and separated on Earth. If Muhammad is a prophet for mankind, the final prophet, the role model for all mankind, then why is he not mentioned by name by any that has gone to other nations? This would have thus proven he was a prophet for all mankind and would have confirmed the 124,000 prophet messenger hadith. Yet, outside the Quran, there is no mention of Muhammad. To be direct, the existence of Muhammad is based on circular reasoning. Muhammad is a prophet because the Quran says so, though not by name, and the Quran is from God because Muhammad says so. So now we have to establish the figures. 124,000 prophets is a significant number. Islam cites the Torah, the Psalms, and the Injil as canon. But considering the bastardization between the Bible and the Quran, Muslims simply have no choice but to the Muslim default. Excuse me while I yawn. The Bible's been corrupted. So how are Muslims going to break down the figures? No other books are mentioned by Muhammad, as he does not know of their existence, likely as he's making this excrement up as he goes along, assuming he actually existed. The Torah has no genealogy. No help here then from the, excuse me while I yawn, corrupted book. The Psalms has no genealogy either, so this corrupted book is of no use. Now we come to the Injil. But in Islamic theology, the Injil was a written book given to Jesus by Allah, of which no copy exists. So no genealogy to see, read here then. What we do, however, though, are the 4 gospel accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, this is a mess in itself for Muslims, because if the Injil is a separate book, a book that simply has no proof of ever existing, then how are they going to establish genealogy? So Muslims, via some desperate and peculiar form of osmosis and cognitive dissonance, will resort to quoting and citing John 14:16, excuse me while I yawn again, thereby implying or is giving tacit authority to the Gospels, yet they shy away from the genealogy of Jesus as given in the book of Luke. I mention this, though it appears irrelevant to the discussion. It will have meaning to the discerning as to what I'm implying. Luke chapter 3 lists Jesus' genealogy from Adam to Jesus being 73 generations. Jews and Christians also have the listed genealogy in 1 Chronicles 2. Muhammad was born in 571 AD, 540 years after Jesus, and we know for certain there were no other prophets after Jesus unless Muslims can prove otherwise, as the Quran makes no mention of any other prophet between Jesus and Muhammad. So there is a void of Allah providing prophets for 540 years. Islam has no genealogy in any of its sources. all its claims are mere invention, fabrication, lies, or good old-fashioned bullshit. So how can we make sense of this? Well, using internet research tools, we can see what Muslims are saying. The line of descent we are looking for is from Adam to Muhammad. The names, mostly, are irrelevant. Muslims have no choice but cite the usual suspects, Adam, Noah, Abraham, and invent the others. However, they have to provide a different genealogy. So, having researched as many as I could, until fatigue set in after exposing myself to the reading the fabricated drivel that caused my head to hurt, nearly all Muslim sources have Islamic genealogy from Adam to Muhammad as being 21 in number. This is pathetic demonstration of demonstration. I mean, most of the names are fabricated in the genealogy anyway, so the compilers may as well have made up the genealogy that has a numerical value that makes sense. After all, once you've started lying, why stop? 21 as a number is a joke. The number is just ridiculous. Think about it. Adam to Jesus in biblical genealogy has 73 generations, yet Adam to Muhammad, who arrived 540 years after Jesus, only has 21. You could ask, what's genealogy got anything to do with Islam and the 124,000 prophets? Well, the point is to establish an average number of generations to grasp the enormity of the problem for Muslims to solve. If Christians had made up the number of 124,000 prophets, we could calculate an average for the whole human family on earth by dividing the figure of 124,000 by the figure of 73 generations from Jesus's genealogy. However, the Bible makes no such ludicrous claim. Therefore, trying to make sense of it, I'm simply trying to help Muslims out. Or by using their own sources and simple entry-level mathematical calculations, I could be trolling them. You decide. So in Islamic understanding, we have based on the hadith 123,999 prophets from Adam till Muhammad being until Jesus, Muhammad being the 124,000th. So what are we left with, and how can we calculate the figure for this conundrum? So 21 generations, with Adam being the first prophet and Muhammad being the last, means we need to divide 123,998 prophets by 21 generations. This gives us a figure of 5,905 prophets per generation. Please bear in mind the number of nations at the times of these prophets, as well as the number of human beings. So let me just repeat that. Please bear in mind the number of nations at the times of these prophets, as well as the number of humans being populating the earth at the time. Helping Muslims out again, let's assume that each prophet lived as the previous prophet died, and assuming that the average lifespan or service lifespan of each prophet was 10 years, that is to say, 10 years serving as a prophet. We can understand this because Jesus only served 3.5 years for his ministry. Will give us a figure from Adam, Islam's first prophet, and to Muhammad, the alleged seal of the prophets, a 10-year calculation for each, 1,239,980 years of continuous line of service by these prophets. We have to remove 540 years from Jesus to Muhammad to account for Allah's void. Increasing the number of service for each prophet only creates further problems for Muslims. Reducing the years of service to just 1 year for the man to serve as a prophet would have 123,998 men serving as a prophet for a total of 123,988 years of continuous service of prophets. This figure just does not help Muslims because 123,998 years divided by 21 generations gives us an average lifespan of 5,904 years. Or even by being generous to Muslims and giving them a total of 43 generations, which is doubling up plus 1 for Muslims from Adam to Muhammad, would equate to 2,883 prophets per generation. This figure simply does not fit with the number of countries, nations at the time in the history pre-Jesus or the Earth's population of humans. Simply put, the numbers don't stack. Muslims may say and cry and wail, Weak hadith. It's a weak hadith. Well, they would have to prove that. But that being said, weak does not mean fake or fabricated. So it's incumbent on all Muslims to provide a solution for this mathematical conundrum. None of the so-called holy books sound anything. So bear in mind that up until Jesus, there was a liturgy of other books claiming to be holy. None of these holy books sound anything like each other. The Bhagavad Gita sounds nothing like the Avesta. The Avesta sounds nothing like the Tripitaka. The Tripitaka sounds nothing like the Upanishads. The Upanishads sound nothing like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the list goes on and on. So for 123,999 prophets to have gone forward with one message of Islam and monotheism, to have utterly failed 123,999 times in the very few nations and peoples and languages pre-Jesus, what does this say about Allah and his abilities? Muslims are obligated by default through the accusation to list all books that would have been corrupted. Please provide the evidence for these alleged books and their corruptions. But this is a discussion in itself. Allah's logic has more pieces missing than the jigsaw from a second-hand shop. Now, the flood of Noah was an account written earlier, and when compared between all the versions that have and still exist, it still has the same principal components. And it's only the Bible that has the whole account from pre-flood to post-flood, and then mentioned and confirmed by Jesus and Peter. Bear in mind, Islam will have you believe that the message of Jesus was a failure too. This in itself is another catastrophe for Islam, because the Quran makes it clear Jesus did not die, yet it was made to appear he died. This clearly indicts Allah himself into the failure of Jesus and his message, and has Allah himself involved in the deception that Christians believed then and still do today. But this is a story for another discussion. And this is the problem for Islam and Muslims. Whenever Allah or Muhammad make a statement, they just dig themselves a hole, and Muslim scholars for dollars cannot get out without digging themselves deeper. There we go. That is it.
Excellent. Excellent stuff there. So let's break this down a little bit. You talked about how, there was all these 100,000 plus prophets before Jesus, apparently, and they would have come to talk to, I don't know, you said there was 190 million, I believe, estimated living in the 200. So I don't know, maybe if we're super generous, 500 million people or something total had lived from the time of Adam to Jesus.
Well, the thing is, you see, I'm looking at it from the perspective that when you look at, say, the biblical narrative, which we have from Adam all the way to Jesus, we see prophets existing, Elijah, Elisha, so on and so forth. So you get a good idea that per generation there was a prophet or prophets existing at the same time. This is why I wanted to go to the genealogy, because if you're going to use the statement of 124,000 prophets and you minus 2 Adam and Muhammad, you have a total of 123,998. So how can you establish the existence of these when and where? And the only way I could come to a conclusion was it has to happen from generation to generation. So Adam was the first generation, he's the one. Then, so how many was in the next generation after him? Because you have to work by a principle of division. 123,998 prophets have to be divided during that period of time. What's the best way to? And the further back you go in time, the less nations there are to go to, and the less populous the human population was at any one given time. Like I've said, today the Earth is nearly 7 billion. In the 60s, it was 3.6. At the beginning of the century, it was 1.9. And going back to the second century, it was only 190 million on Earth at that one given time. So simple logic dictates the further back you go, the less human beings there are for any prophet to go to at that one period of time. Do you see what I mean? So if you make the simple division from Adam to Jesus. Jesus would, would be the 123,999th, Muhammad being the 124,000th. The figures don't stack. And then when you look at it this way, so when you make the division, there will have had to have been about 5,000 prophets at any one given time on Earth. Or if they only did say the service of a prophet for a year, that gives a total of 123,998 years if they worked consecutively, which pushes the human being sort of like family, instead of, I think, about biblical calculations has it as just over 6,000 years now. By Muslim calculations, that has it at 123,998 years. But then you have to divide 123,998 years by 21 generations. So you have human beings living 5,000 years old each. It doesn't work. Do you see what I'm trying to get at here? And I never noticed anybody trying to work out the figures. It was always a statement of 124,000 prophets. Where did they go and who were they? But for me, and I will say this, what motivated me on this was a guy called Stop Spamming, who's an atheist that has his own channel, and I came across him many years ago, and I've spoken to him, where he did the inheritance calculation where the numbers simply don't stack again. So it was that where I got the motive to work out the figures, and I've done something very similar with 90 for Adam, and I've got to admit that one's a classic. It's not as long, it's very short because there's only one statement in Islamic resources about 90 for Adam, but that's a good one as well.
Yeah, the math definitely doesn't work out, as I was starting to say that there was 500 million people who lived before Jesus. I think that number is probably very high. It probably was less, but even if it was that many, I just did the math, and it came out to 1 out of every 4,000 people was a prophet, apparently. And then we have Jesus being the only prophet for 600 years. Let's say another 500 million people lived then. So you got one prophet for 500 million. You got 123,998 prophets for 4,000 each. And then you got Muhammad, who's the prophet for everyone else. And, that might be 15 billion people or something. So you got one prophet that came for 15 billion people. And then you got 123,000 plus prophets that came for 4,000 people each on average. Of course, Adam only came for himself and his own family, I suppose, so that he only gets like 5 people, but on average 4,000. And then as you pointed out, the timing doesn't work out. You got to have numerous prophets at the same time. The Quran says that one prophet was sent to each nation, which is very interesting, because now we have nations that average 4,000 people each. I don't think that you can have a very big nation there with only 4,000 people in it, and it just doesn't stack up at all. And you're right, I've never heard anyone address it from this standpoint before. It more like, there is all these failures, there's no evidence of them, we need some evidence they existed. But then I hadn't even thought about doing the math and seeing out it's not even physically possible that there could be that many previous prophets.
It doesn't. And you have to ask the question, where did he get the figure from? What was he looking at? Because you see, when I look at Muhammad and you look at the statements, it's almost like he's heard something and he's run with it with a completely different understanding. And I can only conclude at that time, somebody must have mentioned, the only figure that comes close in the Bible is in the book of Revelation, 144,000. And I think somebody must have mentioned to him 144,000, and he's took that as 124,000 and totally did not understand what the book of Revelation's context of that number was, and figured, because I think it talks about 144,000 from each tribe of the nation of Israel, and he must have thought that must refer to prophets. And he's gone with it.
Yeah, that's
not
a
understood
reasonable suggestion of where it came about. I put a comment up on the screen from Bill Wakefield here. He says, did Allah make it clear that these were true prophets, maybe they all drowned during Noah's flood.
Well, if Noah was a prophet, then why? First of all, I have to ask the question: why did they not get on the ark? And if I see, this is another question I had with Muslims the other day. Allah is perfect, and in their ascension, they'd have to say, does he make the best decisions all the time? Well, Muslims would have to say yes. And I normally use this kind of line of reasoning with Muslims in a sense of, well, how to make sense of Muhammad, for instance, if Allah's decisions are so perfect all the time, every time, and he chose Muhammad, what does that say about Allah to choose a man that does the things that he does? And you can apply that with that question there, that why would Allah keep choosing failures? Adam was clearly a failure in Allah's eyes. The next generation of prophets after that were failures. Allah keeps making failures with prophets every time until he gets to Muhammad. Allah's success rate is, I don't know what the percentage of 1 out of 124,000, but it's not looking good. You're going to work out that now, aren't you, Sadie? Yes, you're going to work out.
Yeah, well, I actually did it before just to see. It's actually over 99.999% failure rate. So this is the God that the Muslims want us to trust in, the God who has so few successes, you can't even really comprehend how low the percentage is.
The thing is, there's something else mentioned there as well. The comment is, if you go back to that, the previous comment was, did Allah make clear they were true prophets? Well, the thing is, you see, with that as well, how populous was the land pre-flood that Allah would have needed more prophets than just Noah?
Yeah.
See the point? So how populous was what population did we have? Because Noah is only a couple of generations away from Adam and Eve, even in Islamic parlance. And the thing is with this is, obviously, for somebody who follows the Bible, we've got, see, this is nothing that people, we've got 73 generations from Adam all the way to Jesus. 73. Islam has only 21 from Adam to Muhammad, who's 540 years later. The numbers don't stack. So the number of human beings around when Noah was, in Islamic parlance, when Noah was a preacher or a prophet, there couldn't have been that many people around for Allah to require any more than Noah as a prophet.
Yeah, definitely. It's the more you look at Islam, the less it makes sense. Diane summed it up nicely. I always say trying to clarify Islam is like trying to make an intricate sculpture out of Jell-O.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can get started, but as soon as you try to get any details, it just all becomes a big blob, I think.
Yeah, it's I marvel sometimes at, but maybe not so much in Muslim-controlled lands, because there is a genuine, real fear of reprisal, but how people can remain Muslim when they're in lands that have free speech and freedom to want to stay with the religion. And the only conclusion I've drawn on that is culture. It's the culture that keeps people in, not so much the religion. But that's probably a subject for another time, and I might be digressing if I went into that.
Very good. JC says the Quran says each dispensation and people have their own quote unquote messenger. For Noah's time, it was him. It's a very linear way to lay out for the simple-minded. There is no proof of that. So if we do make that assumption that they are linear, you point that out, that if each one did 10 years on average, we'd be talking over a million years. Even if we take it down to 1 year on average, then it's 124,000 years. So, maybe this is one of those mathematical scientific miracles of the Quran, that if we do the math, there must have been a very long amount of time of human habitation on Earth. So maybe that's one of these mathematical miracles or scientific miracles of the Quran.
Well, it's yet again the greatest miracle of the Quran is that anybody believes it, and it's yet again. But once you've got the miracle of anybody believing the Quran, they're kind of minor miracles after that, to get people to accept the numbers. But then once they've accepted the Quran, and the cognitive dissonance that will go through a person's mind to accept it, accepting 123,909 prophets prior to Muhammad is no big thing, is it?
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, as long as you don't actually think about it, even I didn't realize how ridiculous the claim was. I mean, I knew that it was ridiculous and that there's no evidence, but I hadn't even thought about how ridiculous it was in terms of the number of population, the amount of time that had passed, and it's a great point for sure. AKR said they threaten each other to stay in Islam because apostasy is the death penalty, saying that might be a reason why even in Western lands.
Well, I would argue with that in a sense that from my own experience, though the death penalty is real, that would only be prevalent and very rare, though I do know a girl that got her throat cut, and a parents from a guy that was studying Christianity, they put glass in his food, and he didn't realize there was glass in food till a plate fell on the floor, and you could see the glistening of the powdered glass in the food. Those are rare situations. I, on the other hand, believe it's more to the culture and the ties, because you see, the religions may be different, but the Sikh, Hindu, and Muslim community, as far as culture is concerned, is very much the same. And it's one that's controlled by emotion, the fear of ostracism, the fear of, the disrespect you bring on the family name, the shame that you've become a white man's religionist, so to speak. So there's a lot of factors. Yes, in Muslim-controlled countries, there's the death penalty, but in Western countries where there's freedom, the pressure and the emotional blackmail that is given onto their children, particularly daughters, to stay within the fold, is quite immense.
Yeah, I agree that it's culture. In many cases, it's pride. Like for example, people in Turkey, they have the great pride of being descended from the Ottoman Empire. Being Muslim is part of their national identity, part of their personal identity. So to forsake that is really difficult. Just one more comment on this aside before we get back to the main subject. Emmanuel, who is himself an ex-Muslim, said, I actually have a few relatives that I know don't believe, but because of family status, they're not saying anything.
Yeah, there you go. And Emmanuel, big shout out to you. Welcome to the ex-Muslim Brotherhood.
So let's see. Here is a comment that, from JC. This 124,000 prophets, to be specific, must come from the apocryphal texts or rabbinic exegesis of the time. However, the Quran records non-Hebraic prophets such as Dhul Qarnayn or Prophet Salah.
The thing with that is, you'd have to show me where the number 124,000 come from. Muhammad was clearly, he either made that number up or he's got that number from somewhere, and I don't know anything of, say, the Talmud, anywhere in the Talmud where I found that number to exist. The closest I've come to is, as I said, in the book of Revelation, where it mentions 144,000. 144,000, 124,000. I don't think that's too much of a stretch to see where he's got that figure from. As far as Dhul Qarnayn or Prophet Salih is concerned, they're just names in the Quran. Nobody knows who they are, where they are. I mean, Dhul Qarnayn is a subject in itself that I just love talking about. I love talking. Dhul Qarnayn is one of my. See, when I go after Muslims, I won't go after. I mentioned these things, but they tend to slime their way out of it. But Dhul Qarnayn is my go-to. That's my favorite. I love history and the Quran because the Quran has none.
Yes, that's interesting because part of the reason I got into talking about Islam is in my own studies of Christianity. One of the things that I would really like to use is the historical argument, that the resurrection of Jesus holds up to historical scrutiny. Most religions aren't really historical, that If you showed that their religious texts didn't come from where they think they come from, it doesn't really matter, because they're not making historical claims. They're only making moral, metaphysical type claims. They're not making historical claims. But Islam, like Christianity, makes historical claims, which means it can be put to the test. And of course, when we try to look at Islamic history, nothing seems to match up with real history at all.
No, absolutely not. And for anyone that studied the Bible, you know, there's a principle called let Scripture interpret Scripture. So you can look at this situation and you can go to another part of the Bible and see it from another angle, very much like the Gospels. You know, you see different angles of Jesus's life course when he was on earth. History can be very much like that as well. You've only got to say something like the book of Isaiah and the book of Daniel. When you're talking about secular history, you know, you talk about, say, the Babylonian captivity of the nation of Israel. Then you're talking about the Medes and the Persians taking over Babylon in one night by Cyrus. These are all historical, you know, reference points that are proven true by secular history. Then you're talking about geographical locations. Then you're talking about denominations. And you're talking about weights. Everything that the Bible mentions has credibility, whereas any other religion is talking about religious things or practices or codes and their gods. You know, you've only got to look at Hinduism and where did that stuff come from? You know, blue-skinned creatures as gods, the body of a man with the head of an elephant, and he's got a sticker on his paw. You know, you've got another woman, Shiva, I think, with loads of arms, and I think it's also the goddess of death in Hinduism. And you can see that even if Muslims want to say that, well, that was true monotheism that became corrupted, you have to ask, how on earth can you go from monotheism to Hinduism? I mean, you're calling the Bible corrupted, but okay, let's just go along with that. The Bible's been corrupted. How far does it stray from the Quran for the Bible to have been corrupted? It doesn't stray that much, even if you wanted to say that the Bible was corrupted. But to go from monotheism to blue-skinned creatures that have bodies of men and heads of elephants, you know, Papa Smurf, for crying out loud, and suffice, I need, and reincarnation as well. The concept of reincarnation, how can you go from monotheism to reincarnation, and the whole judicial process of what reincarnation is, by any stretch of the imagination, a Muslim cannot turn around and say, well, that was a prophet that went to India and then their teachings got corrupted. You'd have to prove the corruption, wouldn't you? And then you go to, say, Buddha or the Avestra or any of these other religions, and they're so far away from monotheism all the time that you couldn't get any further away than what these books teach. So this is what I say, it's incumbent on Muslims to prove otherwise. It's incumbent on them. It's their responsibility. They're the ones making the accusation. And it's also their God. It's also their God. You have to challenge. If this is the case that Allah chose these men, it's, as you said, failure rate of 99.99999999 and so on. Allah's success rate is abysmal.
Definitely. Diane agreed with you, saying that the 124,000 probably comes from a miscalculation or misunderstanding, or I would say just simply forgetting what he heard about the Bible's 144,000.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You have to look at historical point. What was his influences at the time? His influences were whatever Christianity had access to in that Arabian Peninsula, as well as Judaism, as well as traveling salesman. We've got to remember, this guy was a traveling salesman as well. So going around, he couldn't read or write. I think there's I don't know if it's a hadith or an ayah in the Quran that talks about Muhammad being all ears, because he used to listen to stories. And then there was another scripture, I think it's chapter 2, chapter 3, where it says, don't sell your stories for a paltry price. So it sounds like he used to pay people to tell him stories as well. So you get an idea of the kind of character he is. This is a guy that takes information, then kind of molds it in his own image. and which you find in chapters 1 to 5, 6 of the Quran. Anyway, you can see he takes Moses or he takes Abraham and he molds it in his image.
Yeah, definitely. You know, when scholars look at the Quran, they kind of feel like all these are just stock characters that are kind of reflections of the Muhammad character, that all the prophets are just other versions of Muhammad with different names, with the exception of Jesus. That's the only real character in the Quran. All the rest are just stock characters that are just mirrors of Muhammad.
Mm.
Juliet asks if you could speak about Ishmael's genealogy.
Ishmael's not really mentioned after he gets sent away by Abraham and Hagar. There's not really much mention of him. I think there's mention of him when Abraham dies. He comes to see Isaac, but I don't think there's much mention of him after. You see, the Muslims have to claim some kind of legitimacy to the Abrahamic faith, but you see, this is something in itself as well, right? The Jews were meticulous in their writing of the genealogy, and you can see that God will have motivated them to do that to prove the Messiah fulfilled the promise he made to Abraham and then David, that the Messiah will come in that genealogy. So you can see why we've got that narrative there written down and secured. Why is there no lineage from Ishmael? Well, for two reasons. One, and to put it bluntly, Ishmael was a bastard. He was not a legitimate son of Abraham. He was an illegitimate son of Abraham. It wasn't what God purposed. God purposed for, you know, the Messiah to come through the legitimate line, Sarah, the married woman, the woman he loved. Now, that's where the lineage comes from. It's interesting to note that the Ark of the Covenant, the temples, the prophets, and the kings, all of these important features of God's purpose from Abraham forward up until Christ all come through the line of Isaac. No mention of Ishmael. There is no mention of Ishmael really, in relation to the nation of Israel as they're moving forward, if the relationship was supposed to be so tight.
Yeah, and I would add, in addition to what you said about there being no information about him in the biblical sources, there's not really even any information in the early Islamic sources. This is kind of something they had to make up later on. The early Muslims didn't make this claim that Muhammad was in the line of Ishmael. They only came up with that much later on. End Time 2016 also pointed out that Ishmael had a Hebrew father and an Egyptian mother, so he definitely wasn't Arab like Muslims would like to believe.
Yeah, that's another argument in itself yet again about his mother being Egyptian. So yeah, absolutely bang on point with that one. Yeah, there's just, you could just take it apart, but then when you're talking to Muslims, really, they just nod their head in all the right places and still don't believe you. They've got that presupposition. And I find Muslims on these subjects that we're talking about, say the 124,000, very much like, I found this out growing up in the 80s and the early 90s. It's very much like academia in Egyptology, because Egyptology is where I first came across this experience that in the 1800s, the narrative was set up about the pyramids in Egyptology and their interpretation of what took place. As time moves forward, you find better archaeologists and Egyptologists going over to Egypt, finding out different information, finding different discoveries, not just with the pyramids in Egypt, but surrounding areas as well, that changed the narrative. And I'll give you an example of one. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, David Roll. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, he's done an absolutely fantastic series in the 90s called Pharaohs and Kings. I've got the book, Pharaohs and Kings, A Test of Time. And he basically, the point I'm trying to make is, this is a guy that uses evidence and he challenges the narrative that's been set up by the Egyptologists, but reputations are at stake, academia is at stake, and they're not willing to budge on their narrative because it ruins a lot of credibility because for instance, if you got a degree in Egyptology in 1944, basically it's a crock of shit now. It doesn't work, it's not worth anything because we've got information now that makes your academic achievement worthless. because that's not the truth. This is the truth. It's the same thing with, say, evolution. Every time there's information to challenge the narrative of evolution, rather than say, okay, then as scientists, we need to change our thinking about evolution because this just blows it out of the water. No, what we'll do is we'll try and make it fit. We either make it fit or we throw it out the window. And it's the same thing there. And Muslims are the same as well. If they find anything that challenges the narrative, they either try to fit it into the narrative with their supposition or they throw it under the bus.
Yeah, getting back to the main subject, you didn't specifically touch on this in your presentation, but it's actually not just the hadith that make this claim. That's where we get the exact number, 124,000. But the Quran also makes this claim that every nation has been sent a messenger. Every nation or every people group got a messenger in their own language. So Muslims can't even escape it by denying the Sahih hadith, as they may want to do. It comes directly from the Quran itself, that this claim that there's been all these previous messengers.
But the difficulty is, how many nations were there at that time? This is the problem I have. Okay, so Adam's the first prophet. You have to conclude, logic would dictate, in Islamic parlance, you've got 21 generations. Now, I keep going back to this generational thing, because if I was to follow my family lineage, as if you was to follow your studies, and if the audience were listening as well, if they followed their family lineage and they take it back to the 1st century, right, so Jesus's time, and then count their family tree from Jesus all the way to Adam, I should imagine it would be in the numbers same to Jesus, about 73, give or take a generation or two, maybe 3 or 4. But you're talking within say half a dozen as far as generations are concerned. Islam has 21 from Adam to Muhammad, and you have a 540-year deficit. The numbers don't stack.
Yeah, I mean, any way you look at this, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So when you're talking about the nations, what nations did they go to if everybody was living in one area? Because they didn't scatter to the nations until the flipping Tower of Nimrod. They were all living together. So you needed what? So how many people were living around the time of Nimrod then? I mean, let's speculate it was, say, 500,000. That's a speculation, 500,000. And you've got 5,604 prophets. Why would Allah need so many? And he's going to scatter them anyway. Oh, for crying out loud. It makes your head hurt, doesn't it?
Yeah, and apparently he no longer needed so many prophets in later generations when there were many, many more people.
Yeah, there you go. This was the other thing. I was saying to myself, well, logic dictates the number should be the other way around. The number should be, as humans are populating the earth and spreading out and growing in number, so should the number of prophets increase. We don't find that. You got one at the time of Jesus's day, and you got one with Muhammad. So really, if I really wanted to break it down, it'd become more ridiculous. But I'm really trying to help the Muslims out here. I'm really helping you, but you're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh dear.
Let's see. So I was looking up how many languages have ever existed. I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But I think it might actually be more than 124,000. In which case, that would be another. I can't find it. There's way more languages than you might think, though. Average person might guess that there's been a couple hundred languages or something, but it's definitely at least in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, and then because you're also talking like dialects as well, and you look at, say, India. India has Hindi as its main language, but it has so many dialects. Like south of India, they talk Malayalam. If you go to the north, they speak more, say, Punjabi, and then you go to Pakistan, it's all doing to the east side, it's Bangladesh. So even in the Indian continent, as it will, if you like, that the landmass there, you've probably got about 4,000 languages because the sub dialects as well have to be taken into consideration. But even if people want to say, for instance, languages, well, languages only came about as a result of the Tower of Babel. So you have to ask Muslims, how many lines of genealogy do you have from Adam to the Tower of Babel? You've got only one language up until the Tower of Babel. And how many lines of genealogy do you have? Let's just say 5. I'm helping Muslims out here. 5. That's 26,000 prophets between Adam and the Tower of Babel, only in one language, only in one area, because they hadn't been spread out then, had they?
Nope.
Do you see the problems?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many problems with this claim. It's just crazy. And of course, for some reason, the Quran only seems to know about 24 prophets, and they're all Jewish prophets.
Well, do you think that that's a coincidence, that the only prophets he names are the ones that are in the Hebrew scriptures? See, and notice this as well. When you look at those, I think it's about 18 prophets that are mentioned in the Quran. When you go through the names, what's the thing about the names that are mentioned?
Well, one, that they're all Jewish prophets, but the other thing is their names are all corrupt from the original names for the most part.
But they're also the heavy hitters. These are the main guys mentioned. They're the big bigs. They're not, say, people from, say, the Book of Ruth. Is Boaz mentioned in any of them? I don't know. Not that Boaz was a prophet or anything, but they're the big names. David's a big man in the Bible. Solomon's a big man. Abraham's got to get mentioned. Moses has got to get mentioned. Aaron's got to get mentioned. They're the big hitters. He's not mentioned in, say, the minor ones. Haggai. Zechariah is mentioned. Yeah, but Zechariah, which Zechariah are we talking about, though? Because we've got 2 Zechariahs in the Quran, and by the sound of it, one of them is about 1,500 years old, from what I remember when I was doing some research a couple of years ago.
Definitely. JC summed up the situation well. We got 2 options here, basically. One is the Islamic claim that this is the book that was written by God from before the foundation of time for all people. The other option is the one that JC proposes, that it sounds like some oral tradition by rabbis or something that he happened upon and just gulped down everything he's heard, doesn't it? Well, indeed it does.
Well, the only oral and gulps I can think of is when he got that little boy to suck his tongue. Do you know the hadith? The little boy, so that's the only oral I can think that's going on there, mate.
But this has practical implications as well. Diane said some time ago that Satan, aka Allah, loves synchronism, and any demon under any rock. Antichrist knows no bounds. One day I said to an East Indian missionary, so there's witchcraft in Islam, and she was like, yeah. And this is very true. When you look at Islam in the Asian territories or the oceanic territories, they've synchronized it with all kinds of local beliefs about magic and whatnot. And actually, by numbers, these groups might actually represent the largest groups of Muslims. And I think in the end they're really just doing what they're supposed to. They're following their example of their prophet. Whatever they hear people saying is true religion, they say, okay, let's add that to our religion, and then just call it pure monotheism.
It's a grafting process, isn't it? Where Muhammad just grafted on because he, like a political leader, he wanted to appeal, and by appealing, you give what the masses want. But you want rivers of wine. Yeah, Allah's got that. Oh, you want some virgins? Oh, Allah's going to give you 72 virgins, and so it goes on. And here we go. There's somebody's put that up there just as I was saying it.
Yeah, Wooter just pointed out another mathematical problem with 124,000 prophets, because if they all get 72 virgins in paradise, that means there's 8.9 million virgins just for the 124,000 prophets. And as we know, all prophets are completely without sin, so they definitely are in heaven. And then you got to add in all the people who died in battle for Islam and all of the other believers who managed to get there by some miracle. They satisfied Allah sufficiently and got to heaven without killing anyone. And you're talking about millions. Well, we already got 8.9 million, hundreds of millions, maybe billions of virgins in heaven. Yet Muhammad tells us that most of the inhabitants of hell are women. So I'm wondering where all these virgin women are coming from.
And things you just mentioned something there as well, interesting, Thaddeus, that in Islamic understanding, prophets cannot sin. So that goes back to the question that was raised earlier about false prophets. Well, that goes to my point that Allah could not choose a man that couldn't do the job. So in Islamic understanding, there is no such thing as a false prophet. They can be a failure, utter failures, but they can't be false.
That's a good point. Chloe did point out that the virgins in heaven are perhaps male. It is kind of ambiguous in the Quran whether they are female or male.
Well, that's an interesting point as well, isn't it? Because when you look at Muhammad's hadith, I go back to the one about having a boy suck his tongue. One has to ask questions about what this brothel upstairs really looks like, and also, I mean, I remember somebody commenting politically about there was a social commentator about a political decision a politician had made, or a CEO of a company had made, and it had been a disastrous decision, but he said, I made it while I prayed to God. And the commentator said, what kind of God was he worshipping to make a decision like this? And it's very much when you look at the teachings of Muhammad, you really do have to question Allah, and not many people do. What kind of God is this? There's so much emphasis on Muhammad, sometimes we forget the God that, and that's the important point. It's Allah as well in this, because when you look at the Quran, chapter 8, for instance, there's a point about, I think it mentions it twice in the first 10 or 20 ayah. Twice it reiterates the point of Allah and his messenger, Allah and his messenger. You can see through the Quran that that's a repeated notion. It's a 50-50 partnership. So, but we tend to sort of focus on Muhammad, but I think half as much time should be also spent on looking at this God, because this God is responsible for 1.7 billion human beings being misled into this.
Yeah, and you're right. The God of Islam is no more moral than Muhammad.
No,
he does things like say, if the people hadn't disobeyed me, I would have had to destroy them and create a people who would disobey me. And it's like, what kind of God is that? That you need to be merciful so much that you'll create people to sin, and if they don't sin, then you'll destroy them and find someone who will, so you can forgive them. I mean, it's just insanity.
I think everything that Islam teaches in the Hadith and the Quran is contrary. It's almost like if it says black, you have to go white. If it says white, you have to go black. If Allah says up, you have to look down. I always find with Islam, it's always the opposite. He says he's merciful. No, he's not. He says he's patient. He certainly is not. He says he's kind of loving. When? Everything is opposite in Islam. It's all, when you look at, say, the God of the Bible and the teachings that we find there, his personality comes through. You can see that. And then when you look at Jesus in the first century and the gospel accounts, you can really see the personality of God through Jesus. You see it. I mean, that's what draws you to the God of the Bible. And when you look at the Bible, you can't help but you're more drawn to the God than you are to the people in it. Yeah. Whereas with the Islam, You don't. It's almost like Allah is trying to steer you towards Muhammad as opposed to himself. The reality is you should be looking at Allah. And you get this when, as we see in France at the moment, where people are killing people because of cartoons. In other words, you can say what you want about Jesus, you can say what you want about Moses, you can say what you want about God. Don't say anything about the prophet. And that comes through in the Quran and the hadith. And you're seeing that now. And I think many people miss that, that this is the 50-50 duality, where it's almost like Allah's always pushing Muhammad into the forefront, as if to say, this is the guy.
Yeah, definitely. If actions speak louder than words, then we can see that the primary god of Islam is indeed Muhammad, just based on the actions of Muslims. We have a super chat from Phil 210 or Philippians 210, however he prefers that to be read. Well, he says, wow, multiply that by 70 years. I wonder why they need the power of 40 men, referring to the fact that men in paradise are supposedly given the sexual strength of 40 men in order to be able to deflower all these virgins.
Do you remember when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I made a comment about that no matter what period in time you go in history, so let's start from Adam and work all our way today. And if you took out, say, a person from every decade, from every land, every nation, tribe, people, and tongue, and you stood them all in a room and asked them to close their eyes and say, please, what's your image of the one location that you'd love to be, where if you could spend the rest of your life there? Everybody without fail would say the same thing. They'd want to be on a paradise earth, no death, at peace with the animals, and we're all one loving brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And then Islam, all it wants to talk about is fucking women.
It's true.
You have to, and you have to ask, what kind of God is this that in heaven all he's watching? It's like Pornhub for him. You have to ask serious questions. Allah's got his own Pornhub channel. He's going to be watching live. Sorry, I can't control myself. This Allah, it just does my head in.
Oh man,
this is live. I'm sorry, Thaddeus. This is live. I should calm myself.
That's all right. I mean, it was a bit graphic, but the image is hilarious and sad at the same time.
But
hilarious
true,
because the idea of this God wanting to watch people have sex is so ridiculous, but it's sad that this is actually what millions of Muslims believe. And
well,
you'll at times find Muslim men quite proud of this. They'll be like, why don't you convert to Islam? We have all the eternal sex slaves.
And the sex slaves, okay. Then look at the women. The graphic descriptions are given about them. Heaving breasts, almond-shaped eyes, rivers of wine as well that don't cause headache. And some Muslims are trying to tell me that's just grape juice. I'm thinking, no, grape juice don't cause headache, sunshine, right? And it's called wine. Wine, you have grape juice, but when you allow the sugar to ferment, it then becomes wine. That's why it's called wine, because the sugar's fermented into alcohol. And it's not going to cause headache. Wine don't cause headache. Having one too many beers does cause headache. So this is a brothel upstairs with countless. It's just an orgy. It's an orgy fest with unlimited alcohol at the same time. Going back to the point earlier, what kind of God is this? And it doesn't sit right. What I'm finding surprising is it doesn't sit right with the human psyche. Because going back to my point earlier, that human beings naturally have a different image when they're honest and when they're putting their head on the pillow late at night and it's a tap tap of the rain on the window. Their image is what's universal, and that you can only reconcile that with the God of the God of the Bible. It cannot be reconciled with any other book. because no other book gives you that image. Only the Bible does.
Excellent, and you know, that's an excellent segue into this comment, a very important comment we've received from Mick MLK. I was born and grew up by Muslim parents. I believed Islam until 6 months ago. Now I become distant to Islam. I have doubt in Islam. I almost finished reading Quran. I am interested in Christianity.
Good.
So
So
just one quick comment first. You know, obviously we can't address all your questions live, but I would say, you know, seek answers to your questions. Feel free to contact me privately. If you like, I put my email in the live chat, and it's also found in the description boxes. But what would your advice to our friend Mick be?
Well, he's already started on a path. There's a proverb for MLK. I would use Proverbs 18:13, which reads, "He who answers a matter before he hears the facts, it's a shame and a humiliation to him." Islam prejudices people right from an early age against anything else. So people are making prejudiced comments without having the facts about what they're being prejudiced against. For instance, the corruption of the Bible. The Bible makes it clear, go get the facts, then make a comment. And my suggestion would be, don't come to a decision until you get the facts first. Don't allow anybody to persuade you or to lead you into another direction or to try and put you off. Go get the facts.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you ask this question of a Muslim leader, chances are they will try to talk you into believing in Islam. You know, like say if a Christian was asking this question of a Muslim leader, we have truth on our side, so we don't feel the need to try to convince you. We don't feel the need to try to trick you. We say, look at the facts, do honest research. You know, don't just blindly take the first research result you find in Google. Do real research. If you do an honest examination of the facts, you'll find the truth, and we're confident that the truth is Christianity.
I think as well, just to add on, if you don't mind me, Thaddeus, Jesus says something very interesting in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, keep on knocking, keep on seeking, keep on asking. And if you go to Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 to 5, it talks about digging for it as for hidden treasure. Both of them require effort. If you're digging for something, and if you're digging for treasure, you will dig deep, and you will not leave any piece of soil unturned until you found that treasure, particularly if you know the treasure's there. God's word is truth, and the truth is there. Sometimes it requires a bit of effort to try and dig for that truth. And Jesus says, you know, keep on knocking, keep on seeking, keep on asking. Sometimes you may have to go and seek guidance from people who may have a little bit more knowledge than you, but it's the Bible that talks. It's not people. The Bible defines what Christianity is, not the people. So the Bible should have the last word as to what its teachings are.
Yes, excellent. He asked a follow-up question. He said, maybe you have more knowledge about Islam. How can I know Christianity is more accurate than Islam? Because the Quran says Allah does not accept deniers. You know, of course, the Quran is going to claim that it's true. I can't imagine there's any religious scripture anywhere in the world that claims that it is not true. And of course, any text is going to say anyone who doesn't believe this is following falsehood. So I would say, you know, just my suggestion would be first read the Gospels. And, you know, just ask yourself, does this sound like a person who is from God? Or does this sound like the Islamic picture of a prophet? And then, of course, just because it sounds good, it doesn't make it true. So the first step is to read it. You know, think about, does this sound like something you would want to be true? Is this something you would want to follow if it was true? Is this the kind of thing that God would send if he existed? And, you know, as long as you find that makes sense, well, then you start looking at the historical evidence. You just approach the New Testament like you would any other historical document. You approach the Quran like you would any other historical document. You say, what external evidence is there that this matches up? Now, you don't need to find proof for everything in it, but if you do find things that, if you can't find any evidence for anything, that's a serious problem. If you find evidence for some things, well, that's the normal way history works. There's no document in history that every fact in it is verified by external sources. What you do is you look at the document, you see, is it basically telling the truth? Is it basically accurate? Is it written by someone who probably knew what they were talking about? And when you do that with the New Testament, you will find that it stands up to scrutiny. Same thing with the Old Testament, but of course, the further you go back in history, the less number of facts there are just because of that can be verified just because of the nature of history. This is true of all history. The further you go back, the more time there has been to destroy documents and whatnot. But when you come to the Bible or the New Testament specifically, you realize that it's basically historically accurate. Well, then you got three. One, you have the fact that it's basically true to begin with, and then you have a number of facts that you have to explain. You have to explain. So a secular idea would probably be sufficient to understand why Jesus might have developed the following during his lifetime. But when he died, that should have been the end of his movement. Basically, every person who tried to found a religious movement, and they died, their movement died out. Only a small percentage survived. So you need a reason why it survived. Then you need a reason why the early disciples found claimed to find his tomb empty. You see that this testimony is put in the mouths of women. Well, women were not considered reliable witnesses, so you need an explanation for why which shows that that's probably exactly what happened. A group of women found his tomb empty. Well, you need an explanation for why his tomb's empty. Then you need an explanation for why at least 500 to 600 people claim to have seen the risen Lord Jesus alive. Many of these people are highly reliable. This is some of the earliest Christian tradition, predates anything that is written in the New Testament. Historical scholars, atheist scholars, whatever, they all agree that this is one of the very earliest Christian ideas, that all these people thought they saw the risen Lord Jesus, including opponents of Christianity, not just people who would have maybe wanted to have a hallucination so bad that they ended up having one. And it was multiple people at the same time. Hallucinations are, by nature, personal experiences. So you need an explanation for that. Then third, you need an explanation for why Christianity was able to arise. When you look at something like Islam, you can easily come up with an explanation for why it arose. It was about seeking military power. A secular atheist type might say that Christianity arose because the disciples made it up because they wanted to get famous or make money or have power or something like that. But that doesn't fit with the historical record, because the church was under heavy persecution for its first 300 years. The earliest attempts to discredit the Bible assumed that it could not have possibly been arisen in Jerusalem. We now know that it did. They said that it could not have possibly arisen there. The only way that someone could make up this story and get away with it is if no one hearing it had any clue about the facts. But we now know that it did, in fact, arise in Jerusalem, where people had knowledge of Jesus, where they knew the facts. They couldn't have gotten away with just making up stuff and have it spread. And then if they were making stuff up, as soon as they realized they weren't going to get any material benefit out of it, as soon as someone threatened to put them to death for it, they would have surely been like, oh, never mind, I was just making that up. Carry on. So you got those three facts, among other things, that you have to explain. You have to explain why Jesus' tomb was found empty. You have to explain why people thought they saw Jesus alive. And you have to explain why Christianity arose. And when you honestly weigh the evidence, the only explanation that fits all three of those and is remotely plausible is that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. But if Jesus actually rose from the dead, then it's time to start taking his claims pretty seriously, especially if we have good evidence that the gospel accounts accurately record his claims. And, he claims to be God incarnate, and he claimed to come for the forgiveness of sins, and he claimed that he would die and rise again. And if that's the case, then Christianity is true. Sorry about the long explanation, but I hope that was helpful. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think from coming from, I myself, Mick, I'm an ex-Muslim, so I know kind of like emotionally where you're coming from with your question. I think you really need to sort of like, there's two ways I'd look at this. One, there's a principle called communal responsibility. That is to say, irrespective of what your role is in a particular ideology or theology, you are a partaker of its actions. So by principle of implication, for instance, if people choose to stay Muslim or be Muslim or become Muslim, then you're basically saying, I have no problem with a 52-year-old man marrying a 6-year-old girl, and when she's 9 years old, a 54-year-old man having sexual intercourse with her. You have no choice but to say, I'm okay with that. And in fact, by you saying you're a Muslim, you're in fact defending those actions just by saying you're a Muslim, because you're following the man that your God has chosen. So that's just one feature of many other features of Islam, that if you stay a Muslim, you've got no choice but to say, I agree with all of this. There's something else as well. You're going to be told that the Bible's been corrupted. For you to have confidence in the Bible, I would maybe suggest you might need to do some research to make sure that if you're going to do research the Bible, that you're researching the book that has not been corrupted. And that way, when you're taking in that information, it's just going to be that little bit more personal to you.
Excellent. And Phil 210 added, pray to the one true God, he will hear you. And, that's an excellent point. We're talking about how to investigate the evidence, but the way many Muslims discover that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light is they just take the meaning of Islam seriously and say they want to submit themselves to God. They honestly pray, God, I don't know who you are, but I want to know you. Reveal yourself to me. And then they have an experience that indicates to them that Christianity is the truth. So I definitely would encourage you to just honestly come to God in prayer. Say, I'm not sure if Islam is true. I'm not sure if Christianity is true, but I want to know the truth, and I want to follow you no matter what it means. And God will reveal himself to you.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, those are good points you raised there,
knocked my headphones out there for a second.
So, did you see? Can I just before you ask any other question, Thaddeus, I just want to get your thoughts on this. Do you see the principle of implication as being a reality that you hold to as well?
Yes, definitely. If you're going to take the claims of Islam or Christianity or anything else seriously, then you have to actually take the claim seriously and not just pick and choose what you want to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And by way, if the religion of Islam gets a bad press or is in the media for what reason, it's kind of like on you as well. You have to take stock of the identity that you've chosen, or the path that you've chosen, because let's face it, there's only one truth.
Definitely. Yeah, there is only one truth, and we should all be seeking to find it. Muslims shouldn't be afraid to investigate the truth of their religion. If it's true, they should be glad to find evidence for it, so their faith should be strengthened. And if it's false, they should want to know that. I do understand that it's very, very difficult to face the possibility that not only what you were taught as a kid could be wrong, but what your ancestors all believed, and many of whom are dead and have no opportunity to change their mind now, that all of them believe something false as well. But try to think that this is true of every society. This isn't unique to Islam. Every Christian would like to believe that their beliefs are true. Every Hindu would like to believe that his beliefs are true. every Buddhist would like to believe their beliefs are true. And, you know, the 7th century pagans in Arabia wanted to believe their beliefs were true. And just because we want to believe something isn't sufficient reason to believe it. We need to get an actual objective evidence to believe that our beliefs, to prove that our beliefs are reasonable and true. We shouldn't just hold on to them because we like them.
Yeah, it's not. It's more than a mere sentimental or emotional attachment. And there's a phrase: "Stand up if you're deceived." You know, if you went into a mosque and say, "Stand up if you're deceived," how many Muslims will stand up? Well, actually, there'll probably be one or two that actually will want to stand up, but the death penalty is there, so they'll stay stum, wouldn't they? But the statement is quite true. No matter what environment you go to, if you say "stand up if you're deceived," nobody stands up, because nobody willfully follows a lie unless they're intimidated into it. And that's so the points that you're raising there, yeah, absolutely agree with.
Excellent. Not seeing a lot of questions coming in the chat. So if you'd like to maybe summarize your main points from today to close us out.
Okay, so today 124,000 prophets mentioned by Islam. The numbers don't stack. When you go further back in history, in time, looking at the population and lands that we have today, for example, 6.7 billion human beings and 275 lands. The further back in time you go, you find that the less population, the less lands that were available. So the numbers don't stack with Islam, because you have 123,999 prophets leading up to Jesus that have to be divided in Islamic parlance by what it claims are 22 generations between Adam and Muhammad. So you have 22, was it 21 or 22 generations, 124,000 or 123,909 prophets. However you try to do the figures don't stack.
Excellent. And to tie in with the final comment, the comments from our seeker friend, the truth of Christianity will stand up to scrutiny if you look at it. I have spent 20 years investigating this subject, and I can say with confidence that it does. I obviously can't summarize 20 years of research in 2 minutes, but I have confidence that if you look into the sources yourself, you will find that Christianity is true. And I think everyone, regardless of their beliefs, should want to seek what is true rather than just what it sounds nice or is convenient.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today. We will definitely have Thunderous One on again. I had a lot of fun. I hope you all did as well. Thank you for joining us, and God bless.
I'd like to thank everybody as well. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.